Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the movies well worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. Combining questions, trivia, and games, every episode we're challenged to watch a piece of film history to decide whether it deserves to be remembered for all time in our movie vault. With every film chosen in our previous episode, it's the perfect way to watch and discuss along at home. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a snippet of what to expect in today's episode. I came out of it being like, what a peculiar film. Like, I've broken Craig somehow here. Or I don't know.
That's like the most Nan thing I've heard about like what I've just been talking about as a really horrific. It's like, what a peculiar film.
Oh, well, that wasn't very nice, was it? That wasn't a very nice man.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? Great Scott! I'll be back. Here's Johnny. You're a wizard, Harry.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman.
And beyond.
Oh, hi, Mark. Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the movies well worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. I'm your host, David Osger, and I'm joined by someone who often looks at me from a rear window, claiming to look at the birds despite having vertigo, our very own psycho, Craig MacDonald. Hello, Craig.
That might actually be the best introduction you've ever given me, and for that, I'm genuinely appreciative.
Oh, that's good. I've done something right for once.
I mean, you said it, not me.
Well, I'm glad I managed to fit as many references in there as I could. Challenge anyone else who can do more.
I'm surprised you didn't bring in North by Northwest, considering that this is the first time in a while that every guest is physically with you and I'm not. So this could literally be the North by Northwest in terms of relationship.
True. I did consider you like looking north by northwest, but I was like, nah, that's a bit much. Just keep it to the one word titles. But
okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
We're in a very unique situation today. We feel like we're interviewing Craig, which is always fun. But Craig, last time we were giving everyone an update on the movie vault, but we were also having a catch up on some of the films we've been watching recently. I was talking about how I enjoyed Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, so I know you've watched it since, Craig, and now I just need to ask your opinion because I haven't talked to you about it since.
I feel you overhyped that film for me.
Damn it.
Yeah, nice try. So it was enjoyable enough. I think a few things. One, and I was sort of taken out of it quite a lot by the fact that Andy Samberg is just Andy Samberg. And as much as I like the guy, he needs to learn to not always be Andy Samberg.
Yeah.
Also, I found it hilariously hypocritical for a film that was, showing the distinction between 2D and 3D animation to have basically all of their 2D as 3D renders, and they look awful. What I will give you, however, is a couple of things I thought was genius. One, I love Will Arnett, so his casting as like Pete, making everyone think, oh, it's obviously going to be the villain, who obviously clashes with like Mickey and Goofy in a lot of the cartoons. Nope, it is just an incredibly middle-aged, fattening over Peter Pan, voiced by Will Arnett. I thought that was a genius touch. And also, you prepared me quite well for the ugly character that they use, who, you're right, absolutely classic. And we can finally discuss ugly Sonic.
Yes. I do agree with you. I might have overhyped it in the sense I was like, I don't think this is a perfect film. I definitely have my problems with it, but I was just so impressed by some of the stuff they were able to do, and that was one of them. I was just like, wow, touche, perfect.
Yeah. Also, I never thought I would see a Disney film with Randy Marsh as a background character.
Yeah, that's what I was so impressed by. There was just so many weird cameos in that film, so many random animated characters, and some real kind of like deep dives into like random animation. So yeah, that was a shock. And apparently the ugly Sonic, and I'm glad it panned out this way, apparently they were originally going to have Jar Jar Binks, and I was like, so I know one of the other guests with us today would agree. I think it was best not done that way. I think Ugly Sonic was a much better choice.
Yeah, especially considering that they would probably still give Jar Jar a relatively normal voice.
True.
Trying to create this. Oh, I was just doing a character. People didn't like my weird Rastafarian take of an alien. Whereas Ugly Sonic, they just ran with it. Like, he's a member of the CIA. That's incredible.
The fact that there would be Sonic out there and Ugly Sonic. Like, Jar Jar would just be Jar Jar.
And also just the fact that Disney technically got rights to that character.
Yeah, so strange.
Just as a character, as opposed to, how they've gotten, like, Sonic for, like, Wreck-It Ralph, etc.
Well, very different discussion to what we'll be having for the rest of this episode. But Craig, as we alluded to there at the beginning, we talked about movies well worth watching despite duds along the way. So just to tease the audience at home, do you think today's movie is a dud or well worth watching?
I think this film has aged like fine shit.
Okay. We'll get to why Craig might think that soon. But for anyone who didn't catch our previous episode, Craig, can you just recap us on what we're watching and how we came to choose this film?
Sure. So in our last episode, which weirdly feels like such a long time ago, thanks to that little break, we ended up discussing the Hammer horror, I can't really call it a classic because I'd never heard of it until it was suggested, of Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, a film that I originally thought was about nuns. But because of that, I was able to create the Endgame, Time to Make a Change, which was all about films that are adapted from books or plays, in which our guest, Mary, was able to be victorious, and wanting to give us another film that looks at certain gender politics in a frankly quite concerning sense. She gave us Alfred Hitchcock's penultimate film, Frenzy.
But also a favourite of Mary's, so we'll have to be careful treading with this one, Craig, as we did with Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
I'm always careful treading because I don't want to step in shit.
Well, we look forward to discussing Frenzy from 1972 and undertaking our usual task of deciding whether it goes into the movie vault, our vault of movies that celebrates chosen films for all time. But luckily, we are not alone today in talking about this film. We're thrilled to be joined by two of our previous guests who are here with us today, as we mentioned, in person. So first of all, we've got our resident historian and nerd. Hello, Di Hill.
Hello.
How have you been? How's the weather cheering up your day? Now it's getting sunnier since the winter blues of when we talked about Boxing Day films.
It's very nice. The world is all getting back to normal. We just spent a sunny sort of couple of hours outside in a pub, which is lovely. Yeah. It's like the whole world is getting better again.
I know. Flashback to when we were doing, remote endgame specials and we couldn't leave the house. We all had to be in separate rooms. It's quite a different time.
And then I watched that bleak London murders everyone movie. Yeah. Just sort of,
just to celebrate the kind of cheery time we're in at the moment. So, Di, last time you were on, you were discussing some of the projects you were involved in with the museum. So how have those been going? How was everything that you've been working on sort of tied up?
It's all very good. The Museum of Cardiff where I work is all fully back open as normal now. We've got all of our regular features and things all going 7 days a week. It's very, very pleasing to see, people coming to the doors and getting back to normal and enjoying things. It's fantastic. And I mentioned before, big film project we did with a group called Cardiff People First, who are an advocacy organisation for people with learning disabilities. We created a series of films with them. So if you look up Cardiff People First on YouTube, you can see a series of heritage documentaries created by volunteers from the organisation. And they turned out really, really nicely. And we're very, very pleased.
We're always happy to hear about projects going well and sort of picking back up where we've previously discussed them. Obviously, I suppose the museum is even more relevant now that we got Jurassic World Dominion coming out. Some people enjoying some fossils and dinosaur bones there. Even when we were at the pub, there was a kid playing with dinosaur toys when we were discussing Jurassic World earlier, and it was just strange to be talking about dinosaurs. And then there's the target audience was right behind us, which is always fun. Also joining us is a previous guest who has not been on for quite a time talking about a movie, let alone a normal movie, which is not a comic book one. So we are very happy to welcome back podcaster and film fan Jake Hart. Hello, Jake.
Hello. Happy to be back and happy to be talking something other than superheroes for once.
Yeah, exactly. You have many different shades and sides to Jake Hart. We are going to see those today. And talking about that, Jake, I think the last time we had a proper film discussion was obviously before the Snyder Cut. But ever since then, you know, I dubbed it like the year of Jake. There was so much material out there was aimed at you. I know even things like Eternals, you were like, oh, this is maybe my jam. Maybe that didn't work out so much. But in terms of like projects you were excited for, you had Matrix, you had the Snyder Cut, as we were talking about with Justice League, and the big one, which was Dune, which I know a lot of our guests have discussed when they've come on. Di mentioned it when he was talking about things that he recently watched. I know Kalechi mentioned it, but you were like the biggest Dune fan I know. So please tell us all about, you know, how much fun you've had at the cinema the past sort of year or so.
Yeah, I felt as if Hollywood was like, you know, Jake's had a rough year during this pandemic. Let's give him all the stuff that he likes. So yeah, I mean, with the Matrix, like Matrix being one of my all-time favorite films, to see coming back to that franchise, and I know it's controversial, but I actually really enjoyed it and what Lana Wachowski did with that. It's this year, but you know, the Batman also came out, and that's my favorite superhero of all time. I love what Matt Reeves did with that. Eternals, you know me, I'm a big fan of gods and mythology and all that sort of stuff. So Marvel going into that territory might not have worked out, but I did like some things, and I like Marvel trying to go for those bold, ambitious films more.
Shang-Chi
as well. I'm a big martial arts Bruce Lee fan, so yeah, they're ticking all the boxes for me. But yeah, Dune was the big one. A book I've loved since I was a teenager. I think I read it first in high school, and I always felt very much like alone in the Dune fandom. I don't know many people who've read the book or into the series or watched the older films. I know very little people, so it's really fun now to see everyone getting on the Dune train, with the recent Denis Villeneuve 2021 film. And yeah, it's good to see people being introduced to Dune and then going, oh wow, this is actually so good. It's complex, it's political intrigue, it has amazing characters, it has this huge lore and world. And I think, you know, that's what Hollywood needs. It needs new big sci-fi franchises and not just relying on the superheroes these days. So and considering it was also one of those controversial, you know, HBO Max on cinema day and date release, it shows that the audience is wanting these new franchises, because even with that, nearly half $500 million. So bring on part 2 and see where the franchise goes after that. But yeah.
What else are you looking forward to in the year? I know obviously mainly there's one current project which is on at the moment, which you are enjoying, but I guess even stuff coming up in the year is still mainly TV orientated, I guess. I
would say so. I mean, for me, the biggest films that I was most anticipating this year have already come out. So like The Batman, The Northman. Recently, I wasn't really much anticipating it, but I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once. Absolutely loved it. If anyone who hasn't seen it, go see this film. It's incredible. So yeah, it's mainly TV now, but it's The Rings of Power is the big one for me. Huge, very much like Dune. Read Lord of the Rings when I was a teenager, shortly after the Peter Jackson films came out. Fell in love with Tolkien's world, and cautiously optimistic with what Amazon are going to do with this. Everything that's come out, I've enjoyed what they've shown so far, and you know, the showrunners and the writers coming out and mostly saying all the right things. A couple of things I'm a bit like question marks about, but we'll see. We'll see. I hope, very much like Dune was last year, I hope this also brings people back to Tolkien and into the world of Middle-earth, you know, because we need a big fantasy franchise as well now that Game of Thrones has obviously passed and that sort of ended on a sour note. And I hope this can bring back the fantasy genre to people. But it's I want to make clear, it's not Game of Thrones. Like, it's not going to be R-rated and raunchy and graphic violence. It's going to be Tolkien. That's what the showrunners say anyway. And I think we need that sort of family-friendly fantasy.
Yeah, and definitely considering the House of the Dragon is coming out, which the only thing I'm excited about is like maybe some cool dragon visuals, action, but I just think Matt Smith looks so dumb in that wig.
That's all I can think of is Matt Smith in the blonde wig, and I'm like...
I don't know if you've seen it, Di, but especially from his Doctor Who days, I'm like, Matt Smith doesn't suit, like, you know, platinum blonde. He just looks ridiculous.
What's he doing? Because he's been in Morbius as well. Like, he's not picking great projects recently.
Yeah, the Hollywood run for Matt Smith has been nothing but a mitigated disaster.
we'll get on now to our main discussion, which is discussing this week's film, which is Frenzy from 1972, as we mentioned earlier, which was suggested by our previous guest, Mary. So Frenzy is an Alfred Hitchcock film made later in his career. It's also written, the sort of credits go to Arthur LeBurn, who was the writer of the original novel. And then you got Anthony Schaefer, who's also credited. It stars John Finch, Barry Foster, Barbara Lee Hunt, and Anna Maisie. You've also got quite a slew of like well-known, respected British alumni in this.
Say the name, David.
You got Bernard Cribbins.
There it is.
The only person who matters.
Well, you've also got Clive Swift, as we mentioned earlier, and you've also got Billy Whitelaw and Michael Bates, which I think was the one earlier I mentioned, who was in Last of the Summer Wine. So we had to get one of those in there. You've also got Gerald Sim, who was also in Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. So, which was interesting because I was like, where do I know this guy from? And I swear I've seen this man in something else bar these two films. He has such a recognizable face. But according to IMDb, there's nothing else I've seen which he is in. But yeah, this film is described as a serial murderer is strangling women with a necktie. Several neckties, I would say. The London police have a suspect, but he is the wrong man. This is an Alfred Hitchcock film, probably made outside of the era in which he was most famous, when he was making sort of black and white films or things like North by Northwest, Rear Window, as we were sort of discussing earlier. So the first thing I would want to ask you guys is, what is your experiences with Hitchcock? What do you think of when you think of the man? And are you, a big fan of his films?
Well, I've seen the Angry Birds movie. And
The
I played
original,
the phone
original,
game. Yeah, that's very good. No, I've not seen a handful of Hitchcock movies really, and they're all generally quite good. I've never ended up becoming I suppose I've never discovered him in that era of becoming like a diehard fan. So he's just seems to be quite good, like odd little fat man who wanders in the back of his own movies, and it's as much about it I know really.
He's quite interesting, I think, especially, I suppose, why Mary might have suggested it, in the sense that maybe it was a film that she studied. But I think for like people who've studied film, it's always that kind of like, right, module 1, film theory, Hitchcock. Or it's always, if it's not, George Méliès or Soviet era films or something, Hitchcock is there somewhere. So it's always a part of your bread and butter. Craig, I know you sort of did like essays on Hitchcock as well, and my big DVD box set came in handy for both of us when we were looking through his filmography.
Yeah, I did. I did an entire module on Hitchcock. So I ended up having to write an essay specifically talking about the use of. I can remember it now. Give me a second. The use of animals to display humanity's hidden animalistic nature within Hitchcock films is what I wrote an essay on. It was not well received.
Oh, right. Interesting. But yeah, I think it is very much. It kind of gives you a lot of people the sort of playbook of how to be a director in some sense, how to get it. This is who I am. This is a Hitchcock film. Similar to then, this is a Tarantino film, and it then later influenced that kind of idea of like Spielberg and these kind of recognizable characters, if you will, that as when we entered this room, I've got a Hitchcock Funko Pop, but it's because he has such a recognizable look to him. He appeared in like a television series. He was a big part of the advertising for his own movies, which I think you somewhat get with then Steven Spielberg, Quentin Tarantino, Guillermo del Toro to an extent possibly. And I would say that you possibly had that before Hitchcock or around the same time as well with people like Charlie Chaplin. But I think the Hitchcock was still, because he was behind the camera, he was the first sort of major like big director, and people would go there because it was a Hitchcock picture, whereas I suppose somebody like Charlie Chaplin was because he was appearing in the film as well, and I guess he sort of like was more of that silent era, whereas Hitchcock was there for a lot of the early glory days of Hollywood and sort of transitioned into color film and went from silent to talkies and all of that kind of stuff. So
he's also really notable because there's that cultural theory which is that that you've made it when people can recognize who you are purely by your silhouette. And I'm pretty sure he's the only director in all of creation that you can just recognize him from a silhouette, because he literally made it part of like various aspects, right?
Yeah, I think if like Spielberg is wearing a cap, he might get recognized. But
I would
no.
argue George Lucas. Like I could spot out George.
Maybe if he's in the background of somewhere, like, you know, somebody interviewing somebody and he happens to look at the camera during it. But
I literally mean the blacked out silhouette, like it's just his outline.
No, I agree. And that's how he came into the TV shows as well, wasn't he? Sort of walked into that kind of outline and stuff like that. And he's probably one of the filmmakers which has had the most media made about him. Like there was the film, was that just called Hitchcock, that came out a few years ago with Anthony Hopkins, etc. So, you know, and there's been quite a few sort of different like tellings of, you know, his story and, you know, what he was like to work with on set and, you know, what he was like as a director. Jake, what's your experience with Hitchcock films? You know, I know that within the past sort of year or two, especially with the pandemic, you've used it as a time to kind of like look back at some of the big famous Hollywood films. Had you sort of experienced it much before that, or was it been more when you've been trying to look at these sort of classics, etc.?
Neither.
Oh, okay.
It might be sacrilegious to say coming on a film podcast, but I've only seen, with now Frenzy, only 3 Hitchcock films. So
we're a part of that, you know,
going
through it.
It's one. Now, it's funny because I'm very aware of who Alfred Hitchcock is, the films he's made. I think I know more about the man than the actual films he's made, if you know what I mean. From hearing stories or reading articles of how he was as a director, how he treated actors and all these sorts of things. But it was particularly when I was in uni and I did a course on sound design. Hitchcock name came up because he is known as a master of sound and his use of sound effects. And it was particularly looking at Psycho and The Birds and how he uses sound effects there. Which
you are forgiven.
Yeah. Which we studied and focused on, and I was, this guy really knows how to use sound for emotional effects that not many directors do, even to this day. Like it's very much just put it in at the end sort of thing, but he's using it for narrative and emotional effects, which is fascinating. So it's weird that I never followed up and just watched the rest, because then watching this film Frenzy, I was like, he's done it again. There's some awesome sound effect work here. Which now I'm like, I want to check out more Hitchcock films.
Yeah, I think it's because it's not kind of like other filmmakers in the sense of, you know, there are those big names. There's Psycho, there's Rear Window, North by Northwest. But then because then he has such a big catalogue and it kind of, the hits, if you will, or the more recognizable ones didn't come as much later on. You know, I was speaking to our previous guest, Niall, about it earlier, you know, that there was some films like Topaz and Family Plot and everything, which some of them were just kind of like boring or just, you know, very mundane. So I think because those early days had a lot more of those recognizable films, some people just feel that then like, okay, well, I've seen the famous ones. And sometimes it is kind of like you watch them like, okay, I know what to expect. I know a Hitchcock film when I see it now. First of all, I think to me, you know, I think about Psycho and I think of that classic opening with the music, as you said, with like the text and everything like that. Like that was a big part of Hollywood at that time as well, was the opening credits. And I feel the Hitchcock was a massive part of that as well, in the way the Psycho opens with that kind of like, you know, those strings and the way that the typography and everything is used. Vertigo uses it really well as well. So I think that he was a part of a lot of like classic aspects that become films. You know, Peter Jackson, he has cameos in his films, just like Hitchcock will have cameos in his films. You have a lot of stuff where he did things like with like going into the eyes and the eyes being the window to the soul. He sort of introduced a lot of that. He introduced a lot of suspense. So there's a lot of tropes and stuff that you see from Hitchcock. Are there any ones that stand out to you guys that you kind of were like, yeah, without that, you know, you would, you know, without these films, you kind of feel that each time? Similar to Psycho, I suppose, you know, the whole like, I'll never get in a shower without locking the door kind of aspect.
It's one of those things where I get the impression a lot of the simple things that seem really simple now, like in this movie, you know, a lot of the kind of longer shots he uses and things, they're kind of quite revolutionary for the time. But then when you're coming back to it as like a modern person, if you're not aware of that film history, like, yeah, no, I've seen that a million times now. But there's a number of scenes, particularly in this movie as we get into it, which feel, for the time, probably quite groundbreaking. For people going back and watching it, you're like, yeah, I've seen EastEnders, you know, bloody London Cockneys wandering around, you know. But yeah, I get the impression that's kind of the overwhelming thing with Hitchcock, is the innovations that he put in that are now like really standard bits of cinema making nowadays.
But also, I think this is worth pointing out that one of Hitchcock's sort of main experiments as well, that people don't really talk about, because something like Birdman tried to do basically better with more recent technology in order to pull it off, was that he was one of the first people to try a film in which is just one continuous take. So one of his films, Rope, which is basically just a stage play just filmed, he basically wanted to do it in one take, but because they didn't have film canisters large enough at that point, it's just a really awkward. They'll just pick a really dark surface and just out of nowhere just zoom into it. It'll be a thing like a chest or a table. They just zooms into this and in a couple of seconds zooms out and it's still that scene. And you just know it's just, okay, they're clearly changing over the film canister now. So that's always been iconic for me to remember.
I'll also, refer to Mary in this circumstance because she actually wrote an article which was nicely timed as well, because Frenzy is celebrating its sort of anniversary and being 50 years old, and the name of the article is Misogyny, Murder and Morbid Curiosity. And in her article, which is over on Jump Cut Online, which I encourage you to go check out, she talks about, maybe the wants and desires of Hitchcock and how that is coming through. And she says that, yes, you can absolutely argue that this film does not achieve anything near the cinematic mastery of Psycho or Vertigo, but it arguably gives a more tangible insight into the thoughts and desires of one of the most lauded directors of all time. While Frenzy might not even make the top 10 of Hitchcock's best, and it may well seem dated and cheesy to first-time viewers, now it absolutely delivers in terms of shock and tension factor. It's a film that is, at several points and for a myriad of reasons, going to make you feel extremely uncomfortable. It may even raise a few questions about Hitch and his own certain peculiarities. Which is definitely true, and I think she has sort of nailed, how people might react to it and what might be the sort of background or subtext to this film. Is there anything else you guys want to sort of mention in terms of the time period that this was made? Jake, I know you sort of looked into a bit about how interesting it was, the circumstances around this film in terms of how much they could do in terms of what you could see on screen and how filmmaking was changing in that sense. What do you think about all of that, and what was some of the stuff you found out?
Yeah, well, it was so it was an interesting time going from the 60s to the 70s because the way they rated movies completely changed, and that this new system came in where you could have U's and PGs and PG-13s and all this sort of stuff, and then it was really the first time filmmakers could start doing R-rated projects, purely adult films, but not adult films as the other type of stuff you might think. So it was a really interesting time for directors, and obviously someone like Hitchcock, who, again, I haven't watched many of his films, but everything I've learned about him, he always wanted to push that envelope of shock horror on what he could show on film, really pushing the boundaries at times, sometimes stepping over the line at times, and which got him in trouble. So I can imagine when these new sort of restrictions were lifted in a way, he was like, right, let me go all out. And I think it shows maybe some negativity, it's not all worked out. I think there's some problematic areas of this film, but I appreciate him going for it. And I think it's very much what Hitchcock wanted to make. So it's an auteur film in a way.
I think it's interesting as well, just filmmaking aspect is how much you see change as in terms of how you can see Hitchcock go from silent films in terms of his early days with short films, etc., to then black and white, transition into color. And I almost find that something like North by Northwest or Rear Window, even though they're obviously visually fantastic, there seems to be something different about Frenzy and those type of films in which it seems to be changing the technical aspects in terms of the vibrancy of the colors you're getting, the sort of aspect ratios, and the fact that I suppose he is filming in Britain as well. The fact that they were British actors felt very strange to me because you are used to him working with, American talent. And the fact that this film was shot largely in London, which you don't often get. Films are set in London, but not so much shot in London, which I thought was interesting. So it's interesting to see that kind of Hollywood approach almost to it, but still staying quite traditionally rooted in, British values, etc., by having British actors showing pubs and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that this showed quite as you can see that transition of history and how it sort of changed through Hitchcock's filmography. And yeah, I think the 70s quite a weird sort of time period for having lots of experimental, different type of films.
Decade of the Psychos it was, because it was when all the anti-heroes and more focus on like villainous characters was becoming more popular. So
yeah, exactly. We were mentioning earlier, Di, you know, back in the Boxing Day episode, we were saying about Zulu and stuff like that. You know, it's like, oh, they're all British chaps and stuff like that. There's a few British chaps in this film, but more like the Cockneys and stuff like that. But when you think of the 70s, do you think of like a film like this, or, you know, is there other ones that come to mind?
Well, I mean, what this film does in particular is it really brings that era to life. From that almost like a social history aspect, it's almost and a love letter really to that era. The way it brings together that fruit market, which he apparently grew up around all fruit markets and stuff, and you can see that he's put so much detail into how everyone is moving around and the amount of people in every single scene. There's about 10 or 11, a dozen or so actors milling around, picking up bags, moving things. And like there's a number of scenes in pubs and they're just rammed full of people who are all chatting about different things and knowing each other. And then when it moves into people's kind of more private lives, and, you know, we'll talk later with, you know, the inspector and his wife and stuff. It's so much of that era with the wife kind of suddenly starting to discover foreign food and stuff, and the reaction these kind of old, you know, London blokes have to it and everything. So yeah, if you want to see that kind of snapshot of a really real kind of working class view of London in the 70s, you won't get any better than this film, really.
Definitely, yeah. And yeah, we've had a lot of different experiences with going into that era, as we said, with Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. Now this, you know, things like, even though it was, you know, earlier, but then Italian Job, like you said, Jake, there was that different mix of more like anti-heroes. You got a lot of more like the resurgence of horror and stuff like that. So a lot of darker kind of stuff, which kind of suits Hitchcock, I guess.
All right, rewind those cassettes and play them again, because it's VHS Corner. So this week we've tasked Jake with telling us a little bit about this film. So what have you got for us, Jake?
All right, so looking up on this film, I found some interesting facts on the beginnings, the during, and the after. So Frenzy, as was mentioned earlier, was adapted from Arthur Le Burn's novel Goodbye Piccadilly, Farewell Leicester Square, which was published in 1966 and is believed that Hitchcock read it during the autumn 1970 while looking for a new project after the disappointment of Topaz. And apparently he later told Rebecca journalists, "The book was sent to me by the publisher. I was attracted by the market and by the central figure, an Air Force man who is always a loser. Today is the day of non-hero, isn't it?" Alluding to what we said earlier. Another fact which I found really interesting as well is that originally Henry Mancini was originally composed to score the film. However, in December 1971, Hitchcock attended the final recording sessions and outright rejected the score due to it sounding too similar to Bernard Herrmann, who he'd worked previously in his other films. And apparently he said, "Look, if I want Herrmann, I'd ask for Herrmann." So he sacked him, and then after rejecting that score, he hired British composer Ron Goodwin to provide him with the new score, and was done very quickly between December and the release of this film. British legendary actor Michael Caine was originally the first pick for the role of the serial killer in this film, but he refused the part, apparently. Didn't want to be associated with that role, which is interesting to see the later films he did in his life. But then it was eventually given to Barry Foster, which was awesome. And then, according to cinematographer Gilbert Taylor, John Finch, who played the lead, openly criticized the script's dialogue to journalists, which made Hitchcock so angry that he almost recast that role as well. So a lot of controversy in the production of this film, it seems. And by all accounts, it seems Hitchcock acted very coolly towards John Finch during filming, insisting that he stick to the character's written dialogue. Apparently, they even did different shots to not have Finch in the camera as much and stuff, as a sort of a bit of a spite there. So interesting. And then this is one that I love. I love this one. During the shoot in Covent Garden, apparently an old man came up to Hitchcock and said to him, "I remember your father here in the market." And then Hitchcock's father was actually a very successful greengrocer back in the day, had a chain of stores. Hitchcock was very delighted with this, sat down with the old man, they had a long talk, and then he treated him to a meal and sent him off on his way, which I think that's really, really nice. So those are my 5 facts on this film.
Very Christopher Lee vibes from that last one of let me sit you down and talk to you about history and important stuff. Yeah, well, Awesome. Thank you for those, Jake. And yeah, that's really interesting to know that there was quite some behind the scenes drama, because I think often, especially with something like a composer, you always just think of it as kind of like a breezy relationship with filmmakers. You think, fair enough, if it's like a cinematographer or a writer, that they might come to blows in terms of like the direction, but you don't really think about that in terms of a composer. You think that they come in, do their job, they go. So it's interesting to think of somebody having that bigger problem of like, no, if I wanted that, I would have gone and got this guy. And yeah, no, I was quite surprised by the soundtrack the way it was as well, considering Hitchcock's previous films.
No, that's the thing. Once I heard that, I'm now not surprised, because the soundtrack did come off as one of the more sort of uninspired, I think. Because obviously you have very notable soundtracks with both Psycho and North by Northwest. Whereas this basically just sort of failed to really stand out. This film is not one that you watch for the music. So the fact that he had difficulty finding somebody he was actually happy working with, yeah, that makes total sense after watching this film.
And they would be a rush job as well, so if they had to quickly get something out, so that one makes sense. Anything else that stood out to people?
Well, back on the music thing, I also think I agree with you guys. It doesn't stand out, the score throughout the film. However, I do think, because we mentioned like the intro and with the opening credits and stuff like that, I do think it's interesting the music that they're using there, because when I first watched this film, press play, and this comes on, I'm like, okay, this is very not what I expected going into a Hitchcock film. But then thinking about it, and then I did rewatch that opening scene, I think it is cleverly used, because it's not what you're expecting for a Hitchcock film. But then as the camera's going, through the River Thames, and you see the Tower Bridge and all that, you start to see the grimier elements of London, and the water starting to it goes from blue to like a muddy brown, and it's very contrasting with this music. So it's like, we're back in London, This is the dark side of London. So I think it works in that regard. But yeah, other than that, the music didn't stand out.
I guess it kind of leads you down a false path as well, of being like, you see it and you're like, oh, right, okay, cheery British time, or some like big, historic, especially the fact that the scene straight after that is then these people there on the River Thames talking about how they're going to clean up the river.
And then a woman just floats up on the shore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it kind of really, leads you astray, and like, oh, maybe this isn't this kind of like dark, seedy film. And I think that kind of like speaks to the kind of like levels that I guess Mary was talking about in her article as well, is that, on the surface level, it's like, oh, isn't it British and jolly and everything's great, but it's just like, but these people have these like dark, horrible desires, and that they kind of happen behind closed doors, which other moments and scenes in the film suggest. So let's get then to our opinions on the film as we discuss whether it deserves a place in our movie vault. So, Di, what did you think overall of Frenzy?
I mean, I didn't. It was. It was successfully. Yeah, I feel sacrilegious almost saying like I felt the plot was contrived and shallow. Frankly, I thought that a number of the scenes were successfully incredibly shocking and really tense, and so there were these moments and really humorous at times as well. The performances were all great, but really it was the script. Because if anyone's listening and doesn't know, the plot is that there's this necktie killer who's explained amazingly in the opening scene by all of the extras who see this body floating in the river, and they all just explain the plot of the movie immediately. They all just go, oh, by the way, that looks like the necktie killer. I hear he kills people with neckties. Yes, no one's caught him yet, though.
Oh, no, Di. To add to that, my favourite one is the extra and trigger warning. I should do the quotation marks, but then the people at home can't see me doing the quotation marks, but actual trigger. It's just the one woman who just goes out of nowhere. He rapes him first, doesn't he?
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Why are you so upbeat about this? We haven't had a good serial killer for a while, have we?
I don't want to again sort of tee up thoughts later on, but that does seem to be a weird theme that happens quite a few times within this film. I'm like, this is talked about quite candidly. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but yeah, I do have to mention actually, I don't know if you saw the trailer for this film, but because again, it brings in that kind of like Hitchcock being part of the film aspect so heavily, in which literally the trailer starts and you're just watching the Thames, and then just Hitchcock is there just like on his back on the Thames, and he's like, hello, you might be wondering why I'm floating here on the Thames. Well, this is actually how a body was found in my latest film, which is based off true events. So I just love how that becomes like the narrative of the film, that he's like, oh, I'm becoming a part of the film. And obviously he has his cameo at the beginning of this film. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, there he is, you know, like as you do, Jake, quite often, the Leonardo DiCaprio point-in moment. And yeah, I just imagine that now. Imagine like Christopher Nolan being there like, imagine if I was going backwards in time. That is the latest plot point of my new film, which you can see in all IMAX cinemas.
Oh no, he would just actually explain the plot fine. They would just actually film it backwards, so when it's actually played, you then have to play it backwards to actually know what's going on.
Yeah, there'd definitely be some funny instances with that. Quentin Tarantino would be like, sit your butt down and watch my film, okay?
Okay, I think we're actually skirting around too much around like the awfulness. Dar, you were saying? Sorry, before we completely took over.
Oh yeah, so the plot of the movie is that, yeah, there's this necktie killer. The lead character, though, is kind of boring. I feel as though there's meant to be a plot there for him, but they didn't really skirt. He used to be an RAF officer, and then he's finished with that, and he can't kind of fit in normal life, which is a real thing that happens to people, but they don't really delve into why or anything like that. And basically, he gets accused of these necktie murders because he just happens to be nearby at the time, basically. And a series of really just pointless coincidences, like, you know, because it's his ex-wife, she puts some money in his pocket, which happens to have like her scent on it or something, and he just happens to like walk in the office just after the murder happened, and so everyone blames him. But yeah, then none of them. So the whole plot is some trying to avoid being caught by the police and all that sort of stuff, which is not based on anything to do with his character. He has no character arc. He has no motivation. He has no reason. And the reason for the actions happening to him have got nothing to do with anything to do with his character. It's just that he's in the wrong place at the wrong time and then gets arrested and goes to prison. And then at the ending, it's pretty disappointing, really. He just breaks out and they just walk into a room and see the necktie killer in there and they're like, gotcha. And that's the end of the movie, basically.
Yeah, the ending I was not a fan of.
Yeah, you want there to be a confrontation. These two, him and the necktie killer, who like know each other, they're really good friends, and you know they messed each other's lives up. And you think you want a real confrontation between these guys. You want them to really hash it out, and then
I agree with that, but I also think it also would have been cool if they didn't bring in the actual murderer and left it on the cliffhanger of like, the inspector's caught him.
Yeah.
I think that if you didn't bring the actual murder in, if you left it on that ambiguous ending, I think that would have worked better.
Absolutely. Or if he just stayed in prison and not got, you know, or if I kind of felt as though, particularly with this necktie killer, the idea that there's a really strong idea in there that with someone who is, you know, a murderer and stuff, that idea of how now that he's got someone locked up for the crime that he's been doing, he's going to have to like change his MO sort of thing, you know, or stop killing people. Otherwise people will realize they got the wrong man. Yeah. So how does he cope with that? That would be really fun to see, like, how did this guy who really, I bloody love murdering. Oh, now I don't, bloody hell, I'm a victim of my own success. I got to stop murdering.
I knew it was never going to delve into that. So the moment that he reported him to the police, I was like, well, you're an absolute fucking idiot, pal. You have literally got rid of your own alibi. You have an incentive to make sure that he isn't caught for as long as possible, so you can just keep on doing whatever you want.
Yeah, that would be a really fun movie if he's following, what's his name, Blamey. If he's like following him around on the run and committing murders and every step he goes, that'd be really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of contrivances. I also just think there's an absolute lack of emotion, especially when we're talking about the women being murdered. The one that really annoyed me, the way that he was after he finds out that Babs has died, it just showed the absolute lack of compassion that just made me think he had just had no character. He didn't give a damn about this woman that he spent so much time trying to, like, you know, keep safe and convince wasn't the necktie killer. It was just the moment that Clive Swift's character just goes, but the murder was committed at this time and you were here with us, which means you have an alibi. He's like, yes, the alibi. Just, dude, be torn up.
Yeah, those female characters, they're more kind of plot points to drive Blamey's story along rather than, you know, people in their own right, really. The bit that really struck me, though, particularly with that character, when Bernard Cribbins phones up the copper and he says, like, oh, he's run off with my barmaid. Like, they have this whole conversation about, like, oh, I've got information. He's off with my barmaid. And the police inspector's like, where's the barmaid tool now? She's coming back. We'll get the barmaid. And they have this whole conversation, and the police inspector never asks what her name is. He just knows as, I don't know, the barmaid. Doesn't matter what her name is.
That's what I found weird, because again, I don't know how this would work in actual crime or whether they do this in real life, but there is obviously the whole, have you seen this man? Like, I found it weird that they were like, the suspect is wearing, this very specific coat, and you should know him by this specific coat. And I'm like, but you've been told who he is. Why not ask, the suspect is this man. If you see him or you know him, please report him to the police.
Also, identifying him by the basis of clothes, because that thing that no one ever changes in their entire life. Everyone is just a character in like a children's TV show where they have one outfit that they wear from now until the rest of time. They'll even be buried.
Craig,
what's your overall thoughts?
The film physically made me feel sick in a bad way. So, a few things. One, I can no longer say the word lovely anymore. That was just a horrific scene. Genuinely, I think if there's a scene where where Hitchcock overstepped the mark insofar as what he was going for, it was definitely the scene of the first murder. Second of all, the contrivances, especially with regards to because the other one that annoyed me was how Babs ends up being killed. If anyone cares about spoilers, then I'm sorry. This film is like 40 years old at this point, and it's your own hang-up. Just the fact that she's already aware there is a necktie killer out there. At one point, she thought it could have been Blaney, and she was having to deal with the fact of, this is a man that I'd known and trusted, and he could have been a killer. How can I ever come to terms with that? Oh, he's not the killer. Oh, hello, other random man who was also close in my life, who's now inviting me into his apartment when I know there's a necktie killer out. Yes, of course I'll come with you, and we never see you again. Granted, you have the foresight to like take his neck pin, and then we have to watch horrible scenes of your corpse having its fingers broken. Genuinely, I wanted to cry. Like, this film put me through so much turmoil. And then, the thing that really annoyed me was the coppers are bloody useless in this film. Just the
That's
fact
definitely
that...
a theme from the last film, Craig.
What is it with police in these films? Have just been like, they seem to only question, well, gee, maybe he's not the murderer after he's just been convicted. Literally, the first moment he has after the guy goes in prison, he's like, it's Rush. I'm telling you, it's Rush. It goes, well, gee, maybe it is Rush. Maybe I should now look into that possibility. You damn idiots. And because that then leads to the contrived ending, right? That leads to the entire chain. Like, it would have been better if the police were just like, that's that, we got our guy, and then the murders are still going on in the background, and it has to be Blaney confronting him. That would have been something instead of just the police. Oh no, also just the police's wife who's cooking like a load of fish heads out of nowhere. Those fish heads.
She's amazing.
So good.
I love her.
Those are my favourite scenes of the film. Like,
yeah, that's
she's
the
both
best bit.
How on earth is she a terrible cook, but like some form of like clairvoyant when it comes to crime solving that nobody seems to acknowledge until they've got the wrong guy?
I just want the whole movie to be the adventures of that guy's wife and just ignore everything else.
How she hears about every crime every day. He comes over, well, what is it today, dear?
And she kind of solves them all by just guessing and says it's intuition.
Can we not make this sitcom of them? Like,
I will give the police credit in at least when the potato truck went past and there was like a dead body hanging out of it, they did go, that doesn't look right, and started to pursue it.
Somebody's leg.
And that did make me go, ooh, like when it came out, I was like, Jesus, because at first I didn't think the sack was still on half of the body, so I was like, what the hell is that? And I was like, okay, thankfully it's just the legs coming out of the sack, because I didn't know if the body had just sort of mangled itself as it fell down. But yeah, I'm also just now thinking when we were saying about the disappointing ending, and you said, Jake, maybe it would have been better in this more ambiguous way of like ending with him being caught, but without the other character being there. Maybe if they really wanted to be revolutionary, then the guy could have looked at the officer and gone, I've always liked you, officer. And then just ended on there like, ooh.
You're
Oh,
my
God.
type of man.
Well,
Yeah.
Also, just that secretary as well. Does she really have selective memory? Because when she's first interviewed by the police, it's like, it couldn't have been anyone else. Couldn't have been anyone else. And then they go back. It's like, could you tell us about this man? Oh, yes, he has lots of violent tendency, and I wouldn't want anything to do with him. Really? Could you not think of maybe if he has a history of consistently coming back to this dating agency, that maybe he could have had something to do with it? Maybe just throw his name to the police. Come on. So that's why this film really annoyed me, right? Because a lot of these contrivances made the horrific things that we're put through feel more horrific, because they're things that just are completely unavoidable. No, go completely avoidable even. So you could, because things where, something couldn't happen, you can just go, well, that's awful, but there's nothing that could have been done about it.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think people talk about whether a film like earns its moments. I think those really horrific, and like the potato truck scene, I mean, that's amazing. It's so well made and so horrific, but the characters are so sort of shallowly drawn that it just doesn't feel sort of worth it. Kind of so it kind of feels more just kind of grotesque and horrible, rather than really delving into any more deeper themes that would make it feel more like a tragedy or something, rather than just a slightly gory awfulness.
Yeah, the fact that the psychosis of the main villain is explored by random people in the pub talking about, the sycophants of sexual criminals is something I also feel like really, really uncomfortable with. I'm sort of over this idea that crime is just this black and white thing. I think if you want to explore the idea of sexual perversion, actually explore it and look at somebody's psyche. Don't just brand this person a sycophant and then have the character just be the absolute blandest. I'm gonna do all these things and kill you and walk away whistling a tune or whatever the hell he's doing. God damn it.
Yeah, and the plot itself was entirely about Blamey being blamed for it as well, which again, it devalues, because it could have been any crimes, basically. It didn't for that plot to happen, it didn't have to be, murdering women with a necktie and all that stuff. It could have been there's been a series of robberies, but Blamey just happens to be in the area, so they pinned it on him and he's got to run away, sort of thing. It could have been anything else, and that core plot of that lead character would have been the same. And that's why I think there's that disconnect between the actual plot of the movie and the real horror and kind of reality, particularly that scene, as you say, where they actually show the murder and everything, is really kind of feels horribly real and stuff, doesn't it? But yeah, it's kind of, it could be, he could be doing any other crime and blaming it on Blaney, sort of thing, and the movie wouldn't have changed. And that's why I think it feels like a bit of a disconnect there.
I think for me, like overall, I came out of it being like, what a peculiar film. Like throughout it, I was just thinking, what an odd film this is. Like, what's strange? Like, I think I was glad I watched it, because it was not like many films I've seen before in terms of like that strange blend of like comedy almost and weird decisions and disturbing imagery. I've broken Craig somehow here, or I don't know.
That's like the most Nan thing I've heard about like what I've just been talking about as a really horrific. It's like, what a peculiar film.
Oh, well, that wasn't very nice, was it? That wasn't a very nice man.
Oh, he's a bad man, isn't he?
No, but outside of all of the horrific stuff, because again, I think to be fair, that Hitchcock is doing that for effect. I can't really sort of like cite the horrific acts as like a criticism or like a negative to me, because I think that's what they're going for. And I think it depends on how you deal with horror or like unsettling imagery. And there's a lot of films out there which do that kind of stuff in which you're like, I never want to watch that again because it was, such a traumatic experience. But it's in a film that then has so many like peculiarities and strange choices, and so choices that are very much in things like you would see in like murder mysteries and stuff like that. The fact that he has this pin and they have like this very like specific look to him, even just the fact that like he's like a ginger blonde sort of man, I think is almost odd to me, because again, usually those characters are painted as like a certain look to them, whereas I see that kind of man, especially in that era, and think of like the Sweeney or something, and I think there's something almost not so much comical, but I think it almost is trying to say like, this is somebody you would, I don't know, He's like an everyman in some ways, and that's what makes it quite unsettling. This is somebody you could know, and I think that he has this very like specific look, which you would imagine seeing in a very sort of theatrical production, and the film sort of like portrays itself in that way, and that's why the potato truck scene is very like stands with you, because it is such a weird mix of kind of like, oh, you know, he's into this, oh no, what's happened to you now? How is he going to get out of this scrape? And that was what was odd about the film. It reminded me, it was almost sketch-like in the sense that you were going from character to character, because the fact that we follow him in this scene, I was kind of like, well, what's going on with the guy we've been following for this entire time? I found it interesting. I did quite enjoy the fact that pace was, we had quite a sort of a swift pace to the film, and I think with something that's 2 hours, especially within that era, and especially when we're talking about films from Hitchcock like Topaz and stuff, there is very much the chance that it's going to be boring, especially when it is like a crime thriller film like this, in which you're not going to have a lot of action, there's not going to be any special effects or anything like that. So I was quite impressed by how entertained and sort of like absorbed I was by the story. I felt that even though the dialogue and everything was very hokey, and there was a lot of like sort of like strange decisions, plot holes, wasn't the greatest of like writing at times, I still was engaged with it the entire time. I still felt that there was like quite a bit of like realistic sort of dialogue that kept me sort of like engaged. The characters were kind of still, I felt that the performers were doing enough to kind of keep it theatrical. They knew the type of film that they were in. I think Hitchcock was giving them a certain direction of, as we were saying before, to have that kind of like theatrical play-like aspect to it that still made me kind of like enjoy the theatricality of it. So yeah, I just kind of came out of it not knowing what to think, finding the disturbing stuff, yes, very disturbing, and kind of stayed with me. Found the sort of narrative structure of it very peculiar, but I didn't so much find it kind of like, I didn't find it sort of took away, like it wasn't so much negatives for the film oftentimes with me. Like for the lack of character, for me, I don't think is very much, to me, seem more of a Hitchcock trope. Like I don't watch Psycho and kind of go think like, oh, well, what's this woman thinking? What's she going through? Because she just gets murdered eventually anyway. And it's kind of the same with like Norman Bates. I think to me, I kind of almost aren't surprised when I see a Hitchcock film which kind of goes, here's the story, here's the characters, you don't need to know anything about their past because it's all about this moment. He's very much like interested in what happens when this happens to a person, what happens in this scenario, rather than worrying anything about the inside or the outside. And I think that's why he ends his film this way. I wasn't a big fan of the end of this film. I think I agree with you, Di. I wanted a bit more confrontation, or something that just felt a bit less TV-like. I felt almost it was like a TV drama, like the book on the table and the credits start rolling. But I think he kind of enjoys the aspect of like leaving it on the most dramatic moment. I think that Hitchcock feels almost that anything after that is kind of like non-important. I think he likes, like again, like Psycho, you bring out the car and that's when it ends, you know, like just as you find out who the killer is, you don't see any of the ramifications of that. So that's kind of how I saw it. But I thought it was a fascinating film. I thought technically there was a lot of like great stuff in there. I thought there was some disturbing imagery and moments in there which I thought worked for me. But yeah, I think the only like downsides I think were mainly obviously, yeah, it doesn't have a great portrayal of women at all. The whole tongue sticking out thing I thought was just a very weird choice. I was like, why did you have to do that? I don't understand what he was going for in that sense. I didn't mind so much again like the nudity and that kind of stuff, because it was done in a way that kind of like added to the horrific nature of it. The breaking the fingers thing was very like, oh, you know, that did go through me. And the whole like, where does this whole like meal thing with the wife come from? Why is that a part of it? But I kind of just saw it as a kind of like the book element of it. It felt almost like Roald Dahl-esque or something. I felt like I was reading a kind of like a peculiar writer doing this weird story of being like, oh, what if the detective had a really crazy wife who was making weird meals, which would be fun as its own story or like within another film, but I think it's just weirdly placed alongside this murderer storyline. But I don't know, I'm kind of torn. I don't know whether that kind of like adds to what we were saying earlier with the opening of like, it makes you more unexpected of then the horrific stuff that does come up.
Yeah, I think I'm on a similar wavelength to you, Dave, because I actually quite enjoyed this film, but appreciate it's one messy film in just its script choices. Every character is stupid in this film. Like everyone's making stupid decisions. And I would disagree with you, Craig, and you, Di. I do think all these characters have character. I just don't think Hitchcock is doing anything with these characters. And I feel as if this is almost like a prime example of adapting a book, and I haven't read the book, but it feels like he was like, I'm making the book, we're just taking out all the character, maybe all the monologues that they would have, internal monologues in their head and stuff like that. That's where you would get the character and more spacing out the story. And Hitchcock was like, nah, chuck all that, let's get to like the meat and potatoes of the story.
Don't mention potatoes.
Well, yeah, the potato, there you go. So I can see what he was trying to go for, and I really appreciate what he was doing because he's so experimental. I think you've got to commend this guy that so late in his career, he's doing all these weird experimentations with camera angles and you know, like this keeps pushing the one take, you know, technology forward and all of that. And to like mix up comedy with this dark story as well, I think it's really interesting. I don't think it works all the time, but I think because of its messiness, I kind of really appreciated it in a way. So yeah, that's where I sort of land with it. I think it's still very problematic in its use of women. And oddly enough, I think what's more disturbing to me was how candid the language was about women, more than the actual graphic, you know, sexual assaults. I actually thought, you know, when they're in the pub and they're talking about a murder and they said, oh, she was also sexually assaulted, and then one of the guys, oh, so there's a silver lining. Then I was like, oh wow, like how is that a silver lining? Like, so I found the language very problematic in this film, and it doesn't hold up today in that regard. But I think in terms of the other characters and like with the serial killer, I feel as if that is what a serial killer would do. Like a lot of these serial killers, the ones you learn about anyway, are very narcissistic. It's almost a bit of a game to them that they almost want to be caught in a way. Like it is that sort of playing with the police and stuff. You know, even they mentioned Jack the Ripper. He was one who always used to play with the police and so-called send them pieces of body parts and all that sort of stuff. So the cockiness, the stupidity of him, I buy in the character. But I agree. I think they could have done more with the other characters to just oomph up the film. I think there's a really good film in here somewhere, but it's just got lost somewhere when adapting like the script from the book.
I think I would have kept it to the four, like the two men, the two women. I think they should have just taken the police officer out of it. As much as I enjoy, I know.
I think that's the best part of the film because it's such a dark and dreary film, and you're like, oh, I hate all these characters because I think they're intentionally all meant to be horrible. Even the Blaney, like he's not a nice guy, which is why when he's being accused of the wrong man, you're kind of like, yeah, lock him up as well.
He's probably done something.
That's the thing. That's why it's hard to support him, because he says, you know, I'm going to go kill him for what he's done.
That's what I mean.
Like, he's
yeah.
like, I'll make you do what you've like set me up to do. And I'm like, that doesn't make us want to then support you.
Yeah, and
you should then be like, set him free. You know, I'm like, you know, when you watch something like, I think, Changeling with Angelina Jolie, you know that she's like being locked up by the police and it's a wrong thing to do. And you're like, they're like, get her out. You know, you're supporting this character. Where's this? You're like, yeah, maybe it's better the years in there, you know.
Well, yeah, that's one of the core things I think that goes wrong. I think it's that story of Blaney that's so kind of rubbish that really just brings the whole thing down. And to say, when he's arrested and sentenced, it doesn't really feel like an injustice because actually all of the evidence is real. Like they've got all this evidence against him. There's no other suspect, and you're like, yeah, fair enough, kind of the way that it goes. And but that kind of raises. I really felt watching the movie that a thing that would have completely changed, but would have been very realistic and actually relates to a book I've been reading recently, would be if Blaney wasn't a white man. Because this narrative of, you know, black men being stitched up for murders when they were just in the area is real. Mm-hmm. So there's a guy in Cardiff called Masood Hussein Matan. Let's check his name so I don't get his surname wrong. Matan. But he was from Tiger Bay down in Cardiff. And he was just in the vicinity when a woman was murdered. But because he was Somali and didn't speak very much English, and some other local bloke didn't really like him, and he'd married a Welsh woman as well, which a lot of people didn't like. So, yeah, they arrested him. He couldn't speak English properly at the trial. They didn't get him an interpreter. And he got hung.
Wow.
He's actually the first person to be posthumously exonerated. Wow. So in the 90s, an investigation was opened and they exonerated him for the murder. But by then it was too late. He'd been executed. But yeah, so that's one of the things I think that makes that Blaney character feel so kind of rubbish and shallow, is that all this stuff that's happening to him, it's not really injustice. It's not that there's something wrong with society that's causing him to be blamed. If it was someone like, Matan, who was being blamed purely because he was black and in the area, he was Somalian and in the area. But with Blaney, it's just whatever. Like it's just a series of coincidences. It's not that everybody's prejudiced against him. It's not that he's got some problem that's making it unjust the way he's being treated. So therefore, he's not an interesting character.
And the thing is, I also found you have people throughout the film who are actually trying to help him, and he's just being horrible to them.
Yeah,
even like in that when he's staying at that guy's apartment, and the guy's like, "Oh, I'll help you," and he's like, "Oh,
But I would say maybe that's part of the point. But yeah, go on, Greg.
My big question is, why is this something that Hitchcock necessarily wanted to make? Because from VHS Corner, it was said that the thing that attracted him about the book was about the actual protagonist, an ex-Air Force that was just down on his luck. But just apart from the circumstances in which it was in, it didn't really seem to do anything for the actual basis of the story whatsoever, right?
I think it works within the idea of like when you're again, that's why I was thinking.
Oh, is this David Interpreter role coming back into things now?
No, like in terms of the murder mystery aspect I was talking about earlier, is that the fact that throughout it then you're then seeing like, oh, well, he has a history of like, he was violent to his wife and that's why he did it. And he was like, oh, well, that was only done so we could get our divorce done quicker. So it's almost that they're doing all these things to kind of like explain away why that wouldn't be questioned more trial. It would be used against him, which I think somewhat works in a way. You're like, okay, you're setting up this like case for why he should go to prison, or why the police would think this of him, that he's very down on his luck. He's had a lot of bad luck in that sense. But I don't know, I just don't feel that they do enough with it. I just feel that maybe if the character was a bit more like, I've changed, I want to change, or like, I am a bad person and now I've seen through the actions of this man that I should change my lifestyle more. I feel if the two characters were closer together, that if he lived with him or something like that, if they were more closely connected, you could have had that duality a bit more, and it would be less hokey, that you'd be like, oh, well, it just happens to be that I was, like there at the time. And I happened to sort of throw a few things around when I was speaking to my wife. It's all done in a very kind of like cause and effect kind of way, not this kind of natural, complex relationships, which it wants it to be, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I think circumstances just go from bit to bit. So I don't actually see it. Even though the film sort of goes by quickly, I just don't think anything actually sort of flows really. That's why I just don't find it a gripping thriller. I find the moments of the actual crimes tense, but his actual story of a wronged man, I just don't actually see him go.
He's
through
not really wronged, is he?
No, he's not. He's not. He just doesn't go through any struggle. So I just feel nothing for him.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm a bit more forgiving of it, is that you do, like, for me, I can always, like, at least respect style, a bit more, because if you got, directors, which a lot of people won't vibe with as much, I'm like, well, at least they go, so bringing their personal aspect to it, or as we've discussed before, I think in the previous episode, a lot of times if you're bringing aspects to it which are very out there or very crazy, that's not going to make it a perfect film, because in order to have those kind of zany ideas, then you are taking away all those kind of, like, it needs to have this typical hero journey, all of that kind of stuff. So
I get that. However, I do think there is a degree to which asking me to appreciate the experimental nature of a film is somewhat hard when it's like, well, you got to give me credit as a surgeon. I wanted to go out there and be different with my surgery. It's like, what do you mean? You've taken off both my legs.
Well,
I'm not going to respect that.
I wasn't asking for you to understand, to be fair, Craig, because what I was going to say is just that I think that that's where it leads to a very mixed bag and a very problematic film, is because this is an example of, as you guys said, the Hitchcock wanting to do this kind of thing and having this kind of story, but also then add his touch, which doesn't work in this case. It can work in other cases and other films, I think. And, I can enjoy the kind of hokiness of him maybe wanting to bring that kind of like Dial M for Murder aspect of like the lady sprawled out and that kind of iconic look, and similar to like B movies of the time, like, you know, having the lady in the arms of the villain and all that kind of stuff, that it's not great portrayal of women. It's kind of like very tired kind of tropes, etc. But it's still a kind of part of Hollywood. It's this big emblematic thing. And he can do that if he wants. Like, I want to do this kind of like zany murder, like glorifying murder, having it like this big elaborate thing, you know, the hand draped over, but it just doesn't work as well here because you're dealing with a very sensitive issue. Like Craig and you guys have mentioned earlier, the candidness of how they deal with rape, I think, is a bit strange. I don't like how so many characters throughout there just like, well, they rape at them and just like, you rape your victims, and they talk about it in such a like kind of casual way. I'm like, I know this was the 70s, but this isn't a horrific thing to happen for people, and I think that the actress does a good job in showing how horrific that is, but I don't like the way that they treat it as just like this happens every day kind of thing. I'm like, this is horrible, like what happens.
This is why I'm an advocate for certain things shouldn't be attempted by certain people. That's the crucial difference for me in this situation. Considering I also know the history of how bad Hitchcock is with various actresses on the film, the fact that he then
I will say though, because I did find out that he might have like changed his ways by the time he got to this, because with that particular, the first murder scene, the actress wasn't directly involved, so all the nude bits and stuff, it wasn't her. They got a professional model to do that.
And that's what Mary brings up in the article. She says there was a lot of change, and you know, some of the aspects of this film is him showing that, and like the filmmaking process shows that change almost within itself. But yeah,
still problematic.
Yeah,
in a lot
it's
of
very
ways.
hard to argue that the message of that fully comes across. But
I think he's trying with that thing of all the characters around being so blasé about it, and they do say like, "Oh, bloody good serial killers, great for business," and stuff like that. That's it. I think that's intentional to build up that horrific idea that society is kind of letting these crimes happen. But I think he just doesn't really manage it. Is the thing. I think he's trying to hit things, and in some cases he's not quite there in that. There could be an idea in the movies that all that blasé stuff, all the kind of humor stuff is kind of building this idea that society itself is permissive of male violence, which nowadays we look back and we go, yeah, you know, the way that we all kind of deal with misogyny, with you know, gender and things, it all builds up and then kind of, you know, enables people who are really violent and really horrible to do these awful things. And so I got particularly at the beginning when there's the guys talking about it in the pub about like who anybody could be some weird sadist, and you can see Blaney just sat behind them moving around in the idea that like they're almost being permissive to the idea that this guy is going to be this, you know, sexually violent person, and that kind of is contributing to the crime. That could be the idea he's going for, and I think probably is, but again, I think it just doesn't quite come off. I think really it's the real problem is that core story. The story is a guy gets accused of a crime he didn't do because of just weird coincidences, and he has a kind of a knockabout runaway trying to like prove his innocence. That's a completely different movie than really dramatically looking at sexual violence and murder. Like, they're not the same thing. One of them is a kind of a cartoon adventure story. The other one is a horrible, like, political, really about, you know, social politics and how we deal with gender and violence and stuff. And then it's placed it onto this plot about a knockabout. Oh, I've been accused of a crime I didn't commit. Blimey, I better run away from the coppers.
And it's hard to put somebody in that situation when it's a Jack the Ripper, the necktie murderer. Like, it's not a one murder. It's not like you've been like, I'm going to throw you under the bus and make them think you did this. It's very hard to do that. Like, oh, you've been doing all of these. You know, they might have evidence of why he killed that one woman, the second woman. But what I love again about the incompetency of the police of like, you've been brought in because you have killed Barbara and and several others. What about all the other women? The woman in the Thames, what's the evidence for her? Like, you're just suggesting that he killed all of them. It's just like, so that to me
the thing is, you
bizarre.
have like, I probably know more about this than I should, but it's because my partner is studying criminology, so I get things.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to be like, I probably know more than this, but when you're when you're transporting a body,
no, but it's you also have to remember like fingerprints and all that sort of DNA stuff didn't come in until the late 70s, early 80s, really. Police, unfortunately, sometimes want to just wrap up the case as quickly as possible, and they will blame it on whoever's the easiest to blame, and they will just lump all the other charges on them because, you know, now it's not so much the case. Well, in some cases it is, unfortunately. But then it just would have been easier. Yep, you killed all these people because you're the necktie murderer, and they all got killed by a necktie.
I say, yeah, that's the thing with that did happen in the old days. You know, people were picked up for crimes just because they didn't look the right way, and that's a really shocking, challenging subject that the movie doesn't do.
Yeah,
It's just I don't know, he's just there.
Yeah. The last thing I would say as well is that I think similar to you, Jake, is I do appreciate a lot of the technical aspects. I thought that the second murder worked very well. Just that slow zoom out of the house, I thought that worked very well. I almost wanted it to go for even longer, actually. And I thought that that's why it would have been better if they did something like the ending of it.
I like how it begins, though, because in the first murder, like how they allude to the second murder is that line of "You're my kind of woman."
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's really cleverly done because in the book they show that murder,
right.
and I think it was tastefully done in this regard to not show the second murder because we've seen the first one, we know what's going to happen. We don't need to see it again. So that piece of dialogue knows you know exactly what's about to happen, and then you have that amazing one-take camera shot. I think it's really well done. That's why I think of that when you're coming out and then you see the building. You suddenly get all the sound of the bustling streets of London.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think that's in a way really haunting because you have life just carrying on as it is, and behind closed doors, this horrible act is happening.
And there's a house with all flowers in the windows that it looks quite quaint and everything. I think that's what Hitchcock really captured to you well, was the feel of London, that feeling of anything could be happening behind closed doors. The fact that when that happened at the dating agency, whatever you want to call it, that he just walked out and it wasn't a kind of somebody's seen him, he's done this, he just sort of casually walked away as what might happen in real life. And even those women who went past, there was a scream when that woman found her dead colleague, and they just carried on. I was just excuse me, go upstairs and look into that. But I did appreciate that it was shot in London, captured that idea. And I was pretty sure even some of the pubs, I was I feel like I've been to those pubs. They, all those ones are so famous around, Covent Garden, etc. So a lot of great technical stuff here. The conversation they have through the fruit market, I'm not so sure about that. That looked a lot like the man was tripping over himself as he was trying to back up, following themselves by
tripped over a couple of apples.
Yeah, I appreciated the effort. I liked, as you guys were saying earlier, that there was a lot of people in the background busy doing their thing. There was a lot of good direction there, I thought, from Hitchcock. So we now go to our usual segment, which is to decide, does Frenzy from 1972 deserve to be remembered for all time and gain the honor of a place in our movie vault? I think I know what Craig's answer is.
Oh, you actually still want me to say it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then.
I thought you were going to be angry, or you were going to be no.
No.
Di, what do you think?
Nah, I think it's, not really that worth talking about, to be honest. It's sort of, it's intentional. I think a lot of the details in it, I think it's really well crafted. I think it's just the kind of overall actual, as I say, the plotting of it just wears it down and ends up being a little bit mediocre, to be honest.
Jake?
I would like to say yes, but ultimately I'm going to go with no. There's just a few things that doesn't quite reach the mark for me. As much as I did enjoy it in a lot of ways, no, not one I think people should be, you have to watch this film. I think if you've watched 40 of Hitchcock's films, and you're like, what's the next one? Oh yeah, watch that one then.
Yeah. I don't think it even says that much about the subject either it's going for. It's not a masterpiece of a thriller because the plot is not thrilling. You know exactly what's going on all the time. And as a sort of a horror, it doesn't really hit any of the marks fully. It doesn't really quite achieve any of the different things it's trying to get. So you might as well just watch any number of different movies.
Yeah.
Honestly, if you want to watch an interesting version of this film, just watch Psycho.
But even if you want to kind of see strange examples of mismatches of genres, I would say, we'll go watch this, see how sometimes it doesn't work, how director's style can maybe get in the way of certain films, weird blends of comedy and thrillers, horror. Go watch this by all means. And I think I agree with Mary. I think it is worth remembering, worth looking at, but I'm not sure it would be worth of honor of a movie vault. I don't want to say the same argument for what I said with Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde of being Mary, by her own admission, has said that Psycho and other films, would be in the top 10 and this might not be one of the best Hitchcock films. I think she is right in the sense that, this is important to look at, especially from the perspective of Hitchcock and the behind the scenes stuff. and what it represents for him and maybe the time and how we've progressed since then, getting a great view of London. But not everyone's going to have that context when watching the film. And I think when it stands alone on its own, it doesn't present that stuff within the film. And I think there's probably better examples in the 70s and better films within Hitchcock's filmography, which aren't just your classic ones like Rear Window and Psycho, etc., which would be more niche, underappreciated films that people don't quite look at enough, which I would choose over this one.
I also just think if those are the reasons why you're looking to watch films, that is also not the burden of what the movie vault is for in the first place. We are not a deep psychological, analytical sort of hive mind of films that you should look at like the entire history of how everything is brought and the ways in which it's trying to show like a director necessarily changing. I think the art as well as that has to stand up on its own. At this point, I just think there's too many cons. Get rid of it.
So yeah, unfortunately, another film that doesn't go into our movie vault this week. So Frenzy from 1972 does not get a place. Sorry, Mary, but yeah, we definitely enjoyed deep diving into this film. I think the discussion showed that there was loads to discuss here, and as we said, please keep bringing those kind of like more challenging, different kind of films because there's lots to dig into with them.
Maybe one that doesn't make me feel sick.
We're in the endgame now.
Okay, endgame time. So, as you can tell, I very much wanted to get away from, dark, gritty stuff. So I tried to go for the purest thing I could, and then decided that trying to get you to guess preschool films might lead to a game which was just going to result in 0 points. So what I did is I've just gone for a standard badly explained movie plots game. So this is another area where I derive a lot of joy, where basically people in a humorous way describe the plot of a movie in a way that makes it sound completely disingenuous. So for example, I wrote a badly explained movie plot for the film that we've just been discussing, Frenzy, which is, if you wanted a bad way of describing the film Frenzy, you would say the plot of the film is, man insists that woman wears a proper necktie. That is indeed a bad way of explaining this film. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through one by one, and I'm going to give you a badly explained movie plot, and I want you to tell me what the original movie is. In the event that it's a franchise, I will accept the franchise, except for one case, which I think you will understand when you hear it. But, just to let you know what we're playing for, as usual, you'll be playing for the opportunity to choose the film that we discuss next week. So you have an option of either one of a film of mine, a film of David's, or a film of your own choosing. Something that's in some way related to themes that we've been discussing in this episode, just so we keep the train going. So, to give them an idea of what we're playing for, David, give us a little information about your film.
Okay, so my film is from 1975, so not too far off the time that this film, Frenzy, came out. And this is going with the sort of genres of the crime film, but obviously with what we discussed today, there were a lot of comedic elements in there. And as Craig rightfully pointed out, we need to sort of like lighten the tone a bit. So I'm going for an all-out comedy. I think the 70s were a great time for comedies. So this is, combining those sort of like the comedy genre along with the sort of like solving a crime aspect. It's a part of a bigger franchise. It's one that I'm a big fan of. I had a lot of great times watching these films when I was younger, but we've never had a chance to look into it. It's one of the sort of sequel films, and it's also a franchise that has one of the best soundtracks or themes just of all time. So I think it would appeal to you guys, because I think obviously, Jake, you've sort of dived into a lot of British comedy of late. Di is obviously going to be appreciating of a lot of comedy. And yeah, I think that it'd be a fun film to look back at, not as a perfect depiction, again, of certain types of characters, but certainly a franchise that has a big name for itself and lots of fun moments.
Okay, and in contrast, I've gone from a film for 2000. My big issue with the last couple of weeks is and also generally in terms of the chain of films that we've been having so far, is there's not been very strong female representation. So what I did to find this film is I Googled, I went on a list that was the top 100 feminist films of all time, and I chose my entry from there because I want to feel good about myself for a damn change. So very much I've got this film, which here's how it relates. Instead of the awful, awful depictions of awful things happening to women, we now have probably one of the most recognizable, strong female leads in films of a based on a true story sort of nature. And also, in comparison to the completely inept police service that we've been looking at in the last couple of weeks, being able to do a lot of good within the legal system themselves. So those are the ties that are my film. Di, any reason why you're laughing?
It's Legally Blonde.
I mean, it could be. The only way you'll find out is if you win the end game and choose my film. But like I said, you don't have to choose our films. You can also choose a film of your own. So yeah, are we ready for the game?
Yeah. As ready as we ever are for your games, Craig.
Okay, so we'll start with an easy one, which is Kid Comes Out of the Closet. So what film has the badly explained film plot of Kid Comes Out of the Closet? Okay, both ready?
Yeah.
All right, Di, what's your answer?
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Jake?
That was the same one. Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, Witch and Wardrobe.
Of course, it's an absolute classic. You
I
have
thought
a
it was
wardrobe.
Harry Potter. Under the stairs.
It's not a wardrobe. That's a cupboard.
Well, it's a closet, so it's already not a wardrobe.
But that's actually, Harry Potter's probably more like a closet.
What an incredibly boring, badly explained film plot for Harry Potter if it's just kid comes out of the closet. Number 2. Woman spends years deciding whether to shag a dog or a corpse. Oh, they actually look stumped by this one. Do you have any idea what this is, David?
No, I'm trying to think myself.
You're going to kick yourself when I say it.
I'm wondering if it's animated or something.
I've got an option. I don't know if it's right.
Okay, Jake, what's your answer?
Frankenstein?
We've gone for Frankenstein. Di?
I went. It's Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty
She
and the
doesn't.
Beast.
It's not making a decision about a corpse, though.
Is it Frankenstein? Is it Beauty and the Beast? The answer's Twilight.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
Okay.
So instead of corpse is a vampire, but technically, living dead, right? Next film. Talking frog convinces boy to kill his dad.
I don't know. But I desperately want to see these movies every time you say them.
Definitely a kick yourself one if you don't.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so Di, what is it?
Empire Strikes Back.
Jake?
Oh, I know. Princess and the Frog, I've heard.
Is it Princess and the Frog?
No.
Is it Empire Strikes Back? Yeah. It is indeed Yoda training Luke to defeat Darth Vader.
If that happened to Princess and the Frog, wow, just like the prince gets changed to the frog, it's like, kill your dad. Wow.
Oh, I mean, if you like that, you're going to love the next couple. So, number 4. Paranoid billionaire afraid of immigrant.
Oh no, I realised I spelt mine wrong.
I have no idea.
I mean,
this one.
does that matter given that I cannot see what you've
No,
written?
but it's just a really, really stupid misspelling.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no, I've got it.
Okay, so
You
Jake,
probably
what is
got it right then, because
Right, we'll go for Jake.
Avengers Age of Ultron?
Avengers Age of Ultron, Die.
I just said Iron Man's, but I spelled it with 3 M's. by
Okay, so it's
accident.
interesting. You've both gone for the same billionaire, and you are both... Who's the other comic book billionaire?
Bruce Wayne.
Yeah? Who does he fight in one film? A certain Versus film.
Superman.
Oh.
Batman v Superman.
Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Yeah.
See, I
he's an
initially
alien, yeah.
thought Home Alone, because he's like a really wealthy child who's afraid of people invading his space.
Yeah, but then I thought, are they immigrants, the web bandits? Not
Also,
really.
I wouldn't really call him paranoid, given the fact that I think he had legitimate reason to believe these people were going to break into his house.
Yeah, I suppose. But they had legitimate reasons for doing so. Because they didn't like that little boy.
Speaking of little boy, number 5. A young boy discovers that having hard wood in your hand can lead to all sorts of magic.
Oh, actually, that could.
Could it, Jake?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Di.
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, of course, it's Harry Potter. Number 6. Billions of dollars in subsidies for a potato farmer.
Frenzy? Say that again?
Billions of dollars in subsidies for a potato farmer. Any idea, David?
I'm trying to think whether there's some sort of clever, like, pun here or not. It's the dollars that has also made me think,
Why is it the dollars that stumped you?
in terms of, like, if Jake had a point, but then I'm like, what's dollars?
I'm just thinking of any, like, is there some bad joke about Irish characters?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. More like chips or something.
I mean, again, David, you're really going to hate yourself when the answer comes up. Right, I'm actually going to go for a timeout in a minute.
Yeah, I have no idea.
All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Titanic.
Anything? Titanic. Jake, nothing?
Frenzy, I suppose. Is it?
Frenzy, yeah. No.
Is it Titanic? Is it Frenzy? It's The Martian.
Oh, bugger.
Okay. Number 7. Public transport running ahead of schedule for once. Die.
Immediately feel like I'm wrong. Sliding doors.
Okay, Jake?
Bullet train?
David?
Speed.
David is right. I've never even heard of sliding doors.
It's one of these things like alternate realities. In one version, the train is early, and the other version, the train is on time, and it changes these people's lives. So I was like, a train moves at different times, and I thought Craig's never going to mention
I almost
sliding
thought
doors.
Taxi Driver, but I was like, was he ahead of time? I don't know.
Was that also public transport?
No, I don't.
Taxi, no.
No, it's
Yeah,
not.
it's very much a private hire vehicle. Okay.
Let's talk
number
more
8.
about the difference between private hire and public transport.
Okay, number 8. And I promise this is the most obscure one. Ready? Guy loses most precious belonging, travels to the criminal underworld to get it back. I'll give you a hint. From my previous exploration into the endgame where I wanted preschool films, I got this one.
Could you say it again, please?
Guy loses most precious belonging, travels to the criminal underworld to get it back.
I think, I don't know, I have a... no, but then that preschool thing has thrown me. I might know.
Okay. Jake, do you have an answer?
The Lord of the Rings?
That's
Lord
what
of
I
the
thought
Rings,
first.
Die?
I mean, not a movie. Orpheus and Eurydice, he goes into the underworld. Or Theseus does that as well.
Okay. So I'm going to say that both of those are...
What do you mean Orpheus and Eurydice is wrong? How can that be?
Because it's not Elmo Adventures in Grouchland.
Yeah, I thought, yeah.
It's a retelling.
Okay. Number 9. Cancer survivor never loses sense of humor.
It's easy. Well, I think it is.
For those at home, the moment Jake said that, Di just gave a sort of confused look over, as in like, wait, really?
Well, I have no idea. You go for it.
I think. Should I go
Okay,
for it?
So, Di, do you have any answers at all?
No, I haven't even really thought.
Titanic.
Okay. Jake?
Deadpool?
It's Deadpool.
Oh.
So at this stage of the game, the scores are now even with 3 points
Oh.
apiece.
Gasp.
And with 4 questions left to go, it could be anyone's game. Number 10. A wisecracking boiler technician teaches high school teens to always believe in their dreams.
Wisecracking what, sorry?
Boiler technician.
And he teaches...
High school teens to always believe in their dreams.
What subject does he teach?
dreams.
Well, he's a boiler technician. I don't really think that...
See, I thought I had a film, but it can't be because of the boiler technician bit. Dead Poet Society?
Dead Poet Society. Die?
High School Musical 3, because I've not seen it, might have a boiler technician in it.
Okay. Is it Dead Poet Society? High School Musical 3? David, do you know what it is?
Breakfast Club.
It's Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh.
Freddy Krueger. The
Right,
Dream Killer.
Dreams. Right, yeah.
I kind of wished it was High School Musical 3.
I wish it was High School Musical 3 with Freddy Krueger still in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just kind of want Zac Efron to be there, like, I just don't know if this graduation, if I could do it after that. And then just a boiler man just there, like, you could do it. Zac.
You don't see him for the rest of the film.
No, the boiler technician tries to join in the songs, but he's like a middle-aged dude. He's not got the training. He can't do it.
Number 11. Illegal immigrant chased by the feds. Yet another one where both the guests seem deep in thought.
Illegal immigrant
Yeah.
chased by the feds.
Yep. I'll give a small hint for this one. Think of what another word for an illegal immigrant might be.
Oh, that might be my answer wrong. I'm sticking with my answer. I don't care.
I might know what it is.
Okay.
No, I'm stamped to this one.
Okay. So, does that mean, Jake, you're giving no answer?
Yeah, pass on that one.
Die.
E.T.
It is.
I was actually going to say Paul.
See, I was thinking aliens, but I was like,
Yeah.
but we've already used like Superman and aliens, so I was like, oh.
Yeah. But no, in this case, illegal immigrant being an alien actually just makes the film plot correct. Yep, it's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Number 12, and this is my second favourite one of the round. Small town doctor brings three people closer together.
Oh, no.
I think Di's probably got it, if that's the case. Any idea, Jake?
No, I'm stumped on this one as well.
Okay, so is that going to be another no answer?
Yeah, no, I'm terrible at this.
No, you're doing fine. Di?
I wish I wasn't doing well at this. Is it Human Centipede?
David?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
It's
don't
the
feel
Human
ashamed you didn't get that.
Only sickos think of that.
I'm glad I didn't think of that, actually.
So, number 13, and this is the final question. This is the final plot. A dad has to pick up his daughter. Or, sorry, a dad has to go and pick up his daughter.
Oh, he has to go somewhere. That changes everything.
It does actually change the context, right? Because if he has to pick up his daughter, it could just mean lift. Go and pick up.
I think, I don't know, but I could be wrong.
I've got an idea. No, I can't remember the name of it. No, I remember it.
Okay.
Oh, there's a whole journey there.
All right, we'll start with Di.
Is it Interstellar?
Interstellar. Jake?
Is it Taken?
So, is it Interstellar? Is it Taken? Yep.
Hey. So many, like, girl kidnapped films, but I'm like, which
that's
one's
what I was
the dad
thinking, yeah.
one, you know?
Yeah, the alternative badly explained movie plot for Taken that I saw was just she's gone, bro. But I thought I can't give you that because that might leave you to like Gone Girl,
Yeah.
and that could just really confuse. Which, in fairness, it would technically be a correct plot, but just not the one.
That could just be anything, really.
Oh, yeah.
It could just be like,
Okay, so the final
It's
scores.
just my love life.
So the final scores of that, Jake has 4, but Di is the winner with 5. Okay, so like I said, Di, you now get the choice of what we discuss next week. So you either get my film, David's film, or your own film. What would you like to go for?
Let's go with Craig's.
You're going to go with mine.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the second time that my film has been chosen over David's. So, like I said, I very much wanted to find a film that was very empowering for women. And I definitely had that with this film. It's definitely a film that basically propelled its lead actress of Julia Roberts very much into the limelight, as well as basically taking on this legal action, which is 98% accurate according to its Wikipedia page. But we were going to be watching Erin Brockovich.
Oh, right. Okay.
Disappointed it's not Legally Blonde.
I thought it was like Miss Congeniality or something. Awesome. So yeah, Di has chosen to go with Craig's option, and Craig has chosen Erin Brockovich from 2000. And yeah, going down the legal fun route and a great feminist icon as Craig picked out of a great films for feminists list. So yeah, check out our next episode. We will be talking about that. If you want to join in with the conversation and watch Erin Brockovich along with us, then you can catch it over on Now TV if you're subscribed to them. You can also catch it on Sky, Virgin Media. You can rent it on services like Apple TV, Chili, or of course you've also got physical media out there as well. So yeah, go check out Erin Brockovich so you can join in the conversation with us. That should be a fun one. And like Craig said, I think definitely we did need a change from the misogynistic theme that we've had recently. And Di, your reign has come to an end of like problematic films. I think in this one you've kind of come to terms with the whole, don't lock women in cupboards, don't lick women's hands, and now like there's this, like don't strangle women. Hopefully that's over now. This was the peak of it, I think, where you've said no more.
I'm done with people mistreating anybody. Yeah. I'm only going to watch jolly, happy movies from now on.
Can I recommend Elmo Adventures in Grouchland? Which was like, I genuinely considered that film for a bit, but I thought that might be a bit too far.
Yeah, that Hitchcock to Elmo and Grouchland would be quite a choice. So yeah, go check out Erin Brockovich, ready for next time. Thank you guys for joining us in our discussion of Frenzy. It's certainly been a deep dive into that film and very refreshing and different, especially for yourself, Jake, in terms of the type of film we were discussing. Hopefully we can have you back on soon, discussing some more kind of cool movies from all different sides of the film verse. But what have you been up to recently? What do you want to plug, and where can the people find you?
Well, I've got my 2 podcasts going at the minute, Capes, Cows and Masks, where we talk all about superheroes and stuff. We've been a bit quiet recently, but we will be coming back very soon. And then if you're a Star Wars fan, check out our podcast, Dave, that we do with Niall, The Mondaylorians, where we talk about whatever Star Wars project is out. At the minute, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, so check that out. And you can find it on all major platforms for podcasts.
Yes, and as suggested in the name, out every Monday. So, Di, anything lastly you want to talk about or mention?
Frenzy that's the movie of the sitcom Friends.
What?
It's what happens when Friends did a World War Z parody.
Wasn't there the episode where they all went to London? Oh. And then Frenzy is the results.
Right, possibly.
Yeah, when Ross said we were on a break, what he actually meant was he was going to break Rachel's fingers after he killed her.
Yeah, I think I do see them like going on an open top bus with some scarves doing that. Maybe that's what.
Yeah,
something like that.
That's why we never see the English Emily anymore.
But no, I don't have very much of an online presence, but you can come and visit the Museum of Cardiff, which is open 7 days a week now in the middle of the city. It's all social history of Cardiff. It's very, very good. And you can have a lovely time and probably potentially see me wearing a tie, threateningly.
And check out some history. I know, again, that's another good link where we have Jake could definitely be, happy to talk history with you, Di. So I'm sure he'll be along soon, along with many of our other guests who've also discussed history with you as well. So we keep having that similarity up here, which is always fun as well. When we were talking about last time, was it the dig? Yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for joining us talking about Frenzy. Craig, anything lastly from yourself?
Sorry, people were sending me pictures of Elmo, so I just got distracted. Bye, everyone.
Yep, so we'll catch you next time. Thank you all for listening, and please do support us wherever you can. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ta-ta.
Fly, you fools.
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. And if all of that isn't enough, you can also find us at our website, freshtakehub.com/wellgoodmovies, where you can catch all our episodes along with videos and articles deep diving into the worlds of film and television. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.